So the relationship between agriculture and women is deeply gendered, as we all know, in terms of the ownership of the land, the access to land, and control over the land, and all the agricultural practices are also being deeply gendered. And women play a critical role in agriculture as cultivators and preservers of the traditional wisdom and knowledge, and also giving their labor to the process of agriculture. But even they are invisible in terms of policy, in terms of community support, and etc. And a farmer is still, a male is still represent the term farmer, and the women farmers are always considered as a marginalized or doing mainly the subsistence farming. But now we know that the debate or the entire narrative is changing, and we start recognizing the labor and contribution of women in the farming sector. And the gender, starting from the gender division of labor to the recent discussions on the impact of neoliberal policies in agriculture sector, we can see an entire effect of how gender is being deeply implicated into the process. And access to resources, land ownership, credit, cultural practices, technology, markets, everyone has a influence of the gender systems of our country. And again, the new research going on with the time-use survey and other new dimensions to this sector is giving new insights. In our session, we have 4 important papers, and the first one is by Alankrita Yadav, Feminization of Agriculture and Gendered Time-Use Survey, Evidence from Eastern Uttar Pradesh. Alankrita, please come to the stage. And the second paper will be presented by Soham Bhattacharya and Nancy Agarwal, Exploring the Time-Induced Income Poverty for Women in Indian Agriculture. Welcome, Soham. And the third presenter will be Shakuntala Ghadai, The Impact of Climate Shock on Household Food Security, Gender Dimensions of Coping Strategies. Shakuntala, please come to the stage. And the discussant to this session is Govind Chaudhary. He's already in this stage. So I welcome all the panelists, all the paper presenters, and all who are present here. And we start the session now. All the presenters will get 20 minutes for your presentation, and it will be followed by another 20 minutes by the discussant. And after that, we will have a open floor for discussion. Thank you.
And thank you to the FAS team for having selected my paper for this presentation today. I am a PhD scholar in economics from Banaras Hindu University. And this presentation today is drawing from my own field survey that I've done for the PhD analysis on the topic feminization of agriculture and its impact on performance of agriculture and quality of life. And it is just a part of the survey. I've selected the part of a survey and will be presenting on the topic feminization of agriculture and the gender time use evidences from Eastern Uttar Pradesh, specifically in the districts of Jaunpur and Chandauli, where feminization is visibly transforming both agricultural practices and household dynamics. Since we are a community of agricultural studies, I don't think I need to introduce feminization of agriculture, but since it has become a topic of concern, so I'll just give a brief idea. So feminization is one of the most significant transformations in Indian rural economy, and it has implications for agricultural productivity, along with impacts it has on the condition of women at large and also the farming households in which feminization of agriculture is taking place. So broadly the term refers to the increasing participation of women, and mostly scholars have dealt with feminization in terms of demographic increase in participation of women in the sector. However, while going through the review of literature and doing my PhD work, I realized that feminization of agriculture can't be just quantitatively measured in terms of demographic changes. It also has a qualitative aspect associated to it. And scholars have recently also started to identify that feminization of agriculture is associated with increased managerial or labor use or participation of women in agriculture. Also, how the increased time use contributions unfold the practice of feminization of agriculture. In this, broadly, on this reference, my PhD work is also based, and I also got to understand that there are several contentious aspects associated with feminization of agriculture. First, like I mentioned, that the conceptualization is not completely, it cannot be said that feminization is conceptualized completely. It is rather an under-theorized, and under-theorized because it is a value-loaded term and phenomena. Also, considering that feminization of agriculture can be understood across multiple disciplines, it also is associated with the socio-cultural aspects of a place. So the causes and implications of feminization of agriculture vary widely according to the place where it is taking place. And it might be distress-led or also might be empowering to the place. So for this presentation, my objectives are to the following 4 questions. First being, how do men and women in farming households allocate their time across productive domestic and personal activities? How does this vary across agricultural seasons and between male and female managed households? I mentioned male and female managed households because female-headed households are not exactly representative of feminization, because in the part of the country from where I come, there you might be the de facto head of the family, and still the farm management might at large be taking place by the male members of the family. So we, while conducting the survey, I made this point that we chose only those households in terms of which the females were managing the household, and so the counterparts were male managed households. And finally, to the last question of my presentation today would be, what do these time use patterns reveal about the broader agrarian and gender transformations? The conceptual background for this study is based on the aspect that feminization of agriculture is not only about numbers. It also represents a deeper reconfiguration of responsibilities drawing from the feminist political ecology dimension. And from there, I use the term temporal unfreedom. This concept is to highlight how women's expanded role in production and care work reduces their control over personal time. In other words, feminization often coincides with the feminization of time poverty. That is, rather than being empowering, feminization of agriculture is more about burden shifting. The methodology followed was a primary survey conducted across 2 districts from Eastern Uttar Pradesh specifically, because though it did not have district level data to formulate an index, but we still used census data, which is not so good at present time. But using that, given our constraints, we had to use that, and we made an index, and according to that index, the western parts of the Uttar Pradesh were not feminized. So there was no point considering feminization in a place where feminization was not occurring. And in the eastern Uttar Pradesh, Chandauli was a specific pocket where feminizations, the index for feminization of agriculture was not very high, it was moderately high. So we compared it with Jaunpur, which is the highest feminized districts from the region. And 200 household sample was collected from both the districts, and the households were in the ratio 60:40, wherein 60% households were female managed and 40% male managed households, to keep the aspect of the quasi-experimental research design, where we will compare our results of female managed households to the male managed households. And the time use table was used for this particular presentation, and the data from that has been analyzed for this particular presentation. So the results are as follows. Considering the gendered allocation of daily time, on average, women were found to be contributing total work time which exceeds men by almost 2 hours a day. And even though their productive hours are nearly equal, women perform nearly 4 times more unpaid domestic and care work than men. While men remain concentrated in income-generating activities, the results is that women's personal and leisure time is considerably lower, revealing an invisible but persistent gender gap in time allocation. Now, this finding is not new to the literature, but considering that the implications it has on farming families is important, because my PhD study is also about how feminization is impacting the quality of life of farming families. And while doing the survey, we understood that the women who are largely associated with the health and the education aspect of a farming family, or the new children, if they devote more time to the farms, they have lesser time to contribute to their households. Then again, interestingly, female-managed households showed that the highest total work burden was the same for, they shared the female-managed households had the highest work burden in total, and which is not new, because of course they were devoting more time to farm as well as their domestic duties. And women in these households substituted for men's labor in farming, and they were doing their domestic duties simultaneously. And this reflected what was important for the study of feminization, that this is just an indicator, this shift shows that this is just an indicative of quantitative feminization. And that is more women are working. But a qualitative assessment highlights that the feminization is not in terms of empowerment or time autonomy. And and during the peak agricultural season, and the women's domestic hours rise sharply, yet domestic workload remain constant. And because my survey was based on marginal farmers only, that is, their land size was less than 2 acres, they were small families, and their average family size was not more than 5. So that means that the women who were managing the farms, they did not have a substitute at home to take care of their domestic duties. And like for big families, the domestic duties are sometimes divided between women, but for marginal families, these implications are more pronounced. And even in the lean seasons, women's total work burden remain higher than the male counterpart. And it might be because of the kind of activities that women participate in largely are not very seasonal. They are also involved in the processing of the grains, and also with the subsistence farming or kitchen garden. So every day it is not like it is not like the peak season and lean season working hours vary that much. And this also shows that the dimension of feminization is not a seasonal adjustment, but a structural pattern of gendered time inequality. So the findings urge us to rethink feminization not as empowerment, but as labor substitution. Women's participation expands, yet their decision-making power and their time autonomy do not. So time, in this sense, emerges as an invisible axis of inequality within the agrarian transition. And like I mentioned, the term temporal unfreedom is used to describe this condition, that is women's time burden becomes a hidden site of agrarian adjustment. And agricultural production continues not through better wages or mechanization, but through the extraction of women's unpaid hours. And women's ability to choose how to spend their time is constrained by overlapping farms and household demands. To truly empower women or to establish the positive dimensions of feminization of agriculture, policies must recognize time as a resource and freedom as a form of justice. And neglecting this shall have implications not just for the performance of agriculture, but very much for the quality of life of farming households. So for policy suggestions, I can only say that to address these inequalities, it is crucial to recognize and value unpaid work in rural labor statistics. And infrastructure like water access, fuel, and childcare can save time. And female-managed farms need targeted support in credit and input. And finally, time use indicators should be integrated into agriculture and rural development policies to ensure that gender equitable outcomes are expected. And to conclude, feminization of agriculture, I'd say that feminization of agriculture in its current form is not inherently empowering. It is more like the quiet reorganization of labor and time. And unless policy frameworks recognize and redistribute this time, we risk deepening gender inequalities under guise of progress. And that is it from my end. Thank you.
Freedoms on women in India. So thank you. Our next presenter is Soham Bhattacharya, exploring the time-induced income poverty for women in Indian agriculture. So you have 15 minutes, and Alankrita's, she has already used only 15 minutes because we have to end up before 6:30.
Discussion, Govinda sir, and my co-panelists, friends and colleagues and comrades here. I would straight away start with, as Alankrita has already said something about, temporal burden or unfreedom, I would straight away start that I am introducing nothing new, but I am sort of giving the qualification to that, an income-led qualification to that time poverty. I'm utilizing the 2019 and 2024 All India Time Use Survey conducted by MOSPI. And primarily, I would give away what would be the broad takeaway that we have understood while doing this analysis, that increase in self-employment, especially after COVID, has been seen as a sign of distress, while there are others who might be saying that this is an accounting problem, not as much of an economic distress sign. Now, however, including that distress, we asked a simple question that do self-employed women, as the previous presentation also said, that consume as much as required to rejuvenate their labor paper. Our finding is a strict no. We are finding that 78% of self-employed women in agriculture are not able to rejuvenate their labor power. How we are going to define that rejuvenation of labor power is something methodologically I'll establish. The second part is that if this is happening, what are the probable pathways or processes that are enabling such a thing? Is that the amount of labor hours that are available for self-employed women engaged in agriculture, those are so low that even if they are paid the minimum wage, it won't, their monthly per capita, or daily per capita consumptions level are not reaching the minimum wage level. The second bit then comes that is there a possibility where women can bargain for better conditions of socially reproductive labor? That remains unchanged. So these two processes together, sort of provides a section of women who are engaged in agriculture as self-employed and who are not able to rejuvenate their labor power, hence they are time-induced income poor. The primary motivation being that from 2017 onwards, this is using the periodic labor force survey data, this whole yellow line suggests that the overall, working population ratio for women. If we add these 3 lines, that would show the in which activity status these women are engaged in. As you can see, the blue line, which is for self-employment, almost 34%, which is almost a little more than double of women who are engaged in workforce are engaged as self-employed. Salaried and casual wage worker more or less remain stagnant. And it is during the same time, it is in agriculture, the self-employed that increased from 13% to 34%. The increase has happened mainly in agriculture, and the overall self-employment remained in rural sector within agriculture. There's a slight contribution from manufacturing sector and services sector. In the other, mining and construction doesn't contribute anything towards the self-employment. Now, here comes the first puzzle that, in the previous presentation, we were thinking about the temporal unfreedom. So I would just try to look into these 2 numbers. The 2024 in minutes, an average self-employed worker, female worker is spending vis-a-vis that of 2019. Self-care and maintenance includes sleep and related self-care. That was 692 minutes, is reduced roughly about by 14 minutes, and leisure and cultural activities as part of your, and here we are only taking the activities which are called as major activities. So there is no simultaneous minor activity taken into account. So if we are seeing that, the overall literature on time poverty often says that, as and when women start entering into the agricultural workforce, it is most likely that their leisure and cultural activities and self-care and maintenance would be, sort of diminished. It is diminished. When compared to male, it still remains diminished, but not as significant as one would expect. 14 hours of your self-care and 14 minutes of your self-care and 3 minutes of your leisure and cultural activities. This is the first empirical puzzle with which we start. And then we extend the empirical puzzle with a few literature that talks about female labor absorption or capacities of female labor absorption. I think both the authors that I'm citing are in audience. Professor Niladri studied, 9 villages and looked into the surplus labor or underemployed labor that are there, and Niyati's study also looked into that the mechanization being gendered and technological changes has happened in such a fashion that in Niyati's case it was rice. So, a lot of mechanized activities does not absorb even if women are self-employed or in any other form of status of activities. So if we are seeing on the one hand, female are increasing in terms of their self-employment or their working population ratio is increasing in agriculture through that. Second, we are observing there is not much of time penalty, so to speak. And third, we are also seeing that there is hardly any scope for women to work when it comes down to mechanized agriculture. I'm not saying this is the universal story. Of course, there are regional dimensions to it. But if these 3 are taken together, there appears a question that is there a penalty of self-employment which cannot be only understood through time? Is there a qualitative aspect to that self-employment? And that qualitative aspect is something, by sort of expanding the concepts of time poverty into a more quantitative and, understandable empirical term where, we are using the time-used survey, which follows the definition of, International Conference of Labor Statisticians. And broadly, if we are speaking, that then time-used survey uses these broad 1-digit activities over the day. A 24-hour can be broken down into these 9 activities. So the first 2, employment and own use production or work for own use production, is taken as productive activities. Domestic care and unpaid domestic help is taken as socially reproductive labor activities. The rest of the work is kept as other activities. Looking into this, we want to understand that if we have a wage line where we are taking the minimum wage converted into hour, and then I multiply that with the productive hours being employment and own use production for self-employed women in agriculture, And if their per capita consumption per day is less than that daily wage line, that minimum wage line, I'm calling them time-induced income poor. Vis-a-vis, they are not, or not time-induced income poor if they are above these lines. And then to further look into whether it is productive hours or socially reproductive hours or other hours that are creating the distinction between time-induced income poor or not, we have utilized a good old method of Itzhaki and Shorrock to break it down because these are sort of mutually exclusive groups. We have broken down the inequality of these time into two groups. What we are interested in is the share of group K, which is 2, time-induced income poor and non-poor, in type of these hours, through which we are trying to understand whether it is employment hours or productive hours or socially reproductive hours that are causing these time-induced income poverty. So these are the wages. As I said, the minimum wage line is set as, unskilled for ADSE per day for 8 hours. It was set at 308 in 2019. Roughly comes down to 38.5 rupees per hour. And 2024, we have inflated by 2.5% of the same. That comes to roughly 316 rupees. Again, 1 rupee increase over the 5 years. And this is the primary takeaway, the incidence of what we are calling as TIIP. If I take own account workers, these are the broad 3 categories of self-employment. And this self-employment time use survey only takes into account the principal status. There is no subsidiary status. That means these women have worked in agriculture and allied for 183 days or more. So, and among them, in 2019, 77.1% women who were overall self-employed did not earn something of a minimum wage in agriculture. And if I move to 2024, the picture has not much changed, slightly decimal pointage changes, almost 77%, a little more than, 3/4 of your self-employed women who are engaged in agriculture remain time-induced income poor. Then comes the question that, is that something, are we homogenizing or saying that all self-employed women are similar to that? In order to look into that, I'm looking into those women who are poor, in which classes they belong to. Therefore, I have taken the land possessed by the household. And here one can obviously observe that in both in 2019 and 2024, the distribution of poor largely lies in the landless and marginal and small farmers. So the question of these time-induced income poor and self-employment is not somewhat that is diverse from the questions of differentiation that are ongoing. And it is almost similar to their share in the overall agricultural self-employment population. So if I take the number of poor contribution and their contribution in overall distribution, it's almost 1. So whoever has joined agriculture in that fashion remains poor. And then eventually the question of, the burden of unpaid domestic work, it remains almost similar. I mean, in 2019, female were spending 267 minutes, roughly a little more than 4 hours. Now they are spending 256, so 11 minutes of difference. Then here comes, therefore, the decomposition analysis of the Gini through hours to see whether it is productive hours or socially reproductive labor hours or other hours that is sort of causing this kind of a time-induced. I would ask you to, concentrate on the last final one. This is the between group share, which means between the groups of poor and non-poor, whether productive hours, socially reproductive hours, or other hours are important. Within group means that within the poor, what is the share in overall Gini? So if I break down the Gini, and if I think that 0.37 as 100, then 47% of that inequality is coming from, for productive hours, from the within poor. Whereas 53% almost is coming from the, so therefore, I mean, even if you are, sort of engaged in agriculture, doesn't necessarily, in self-employment, doesn't necessarily mean you have the economic bargaining power or qualitatively you are better, because largely your poverty is dependent on productive share. Because in the other hours, socially reproductive hours or other hours, the between group share, falls drastically. Its explanatory power is not as much as the within group shares. And the last bit to, See, the last bit to say is that the moment we are only talking about productive hours and self-employment, the already existing burden doesn't change much. If we are taking the conditions of social reproduction of labor hours in households, so for the time-induced income poor women, it's only 41% have access to clean fuel. 4.7%, of course, I mean, anyone who has been to villages, we know that there is no meaning of putting it that the machine used for washing or sweeping is almost not there. And therefore, it suggests that on the one hand, your productive hours are non-remunerative. On the other hand, there is not as much difference in the conditions under which you are socially reproducing the labor hours for everyone in the households. It is at this, sort of place, this is the provocation with which I want to end, that these are meager earnings and low labor hours. There is hardly any non-farm labor absorptions in the same sense of self-employment, as we have seen 84% are in agriculture. There is a latent reserve army that is existing over there who are, either through accounting error or by the measures of definition or because there is nothing else to do, are, their domestic confines and their agrarian work is closely linked. And then we have new populist states which are providing conditional or unconditional cash transfer as a relief. However, that relief, these are why I'm calling it a band-aid policy, because it doesn't question a larger structure where you have those P1, P2, P3 and P4. These are all part of your latent reserve army when the economy goes into downturn. And before that, once your economy was going upturn, which the other literature have shown, that agriculture was growing through investment, you had, sort of defeminization, where, your machine use could not be, the gendered time use was effectively seen in terms of, while it was happening. Now that the economy is going downturn, you have self-employment growing, but in the sense of their work, they're part of the large latent reserve army, as well as it is known historically that, the lower rung of the peasantry has always been. So with that, I'll end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Soham, for a very detailed investigation on the time use and the income-induced poor in women. And it is like a continuation of Alankrita's paper, I think. And our third presentation will be Shakuntala Ghadai, the impact of climate shock on household food security, gender dimensions of coping strategies. Please.
Hello everyone, I'm Shakuntala from CDS. First of all, thank you chairs and discussant, and also I would like to thank you FS for this opportunity. So I'm going to present my work on the impact of climate shock on household food security, gender dimension of coping strategy. So let's begin with what is food security. I know everyone knows what is food security. It has been discussing throughout our conference. So coming to food security state when all people at all time have physical, social and economic access to safe, sufficient and nutritious food which meet their dietary needs. So in this definition itself talk about the physical presence of or availability of food, the people's ability to obtain food, as well as the dietary needs, like the requirement of nutrition sufficient food, and also the consistency of food availability. So why a household or a country fall into the, that current hunger index, like India is a serious level of hunger. Why this is happening? So there are various causes for it, like economic factors, like environmental factors, social factors, infrastructural issues, and so on. Here, what we are going to discuss about the environmental factor, the climate shock. So when there is a shock happen, it affects food security in two ways. one is income loss, and second is asset loss. So begin to these, like, if a household, to cope off their, that shock, they are selling their land or some productive resources, it can have a negative impact throughout it's a longer effect. I can say it is a chronic food insecurity happen if they lose like their productive resources. So when shock happen, who in a household, who affect more? So some studies found that women who get affected more when their shock happen in a household. But some studies found that women empowerment can be a process towards household food security. So here what we are doing is, if women empowerment really helpful for improving household food security, does it help when household fall into any weather shock? So for that, these are the research question gap we have. And for framework, we have used sustainable livelihood framework, and also capability approach of SANE, where we have given that if a women have the economic capability, civic capability, social capability, that can be a process to household food security if the household face any shock or seasonality. So for that, we have used a VDSA dataset from 2010 to 2014. Here, they have collected data from semi-arid region. In this analysis, we have included Bihar, Odisha, and Jharkhand dataset. So for measuring food security, we have included per day calorie consumption of the household. As you know, gender and age, the calorie requirement is defined by age and gender. So for that, we have used adult equivalence method to adjust that. And as you know, women empowerment is a multidimensional aspect, and it is very difficult to measure quantitatively. But due to that constraint, we did factor analysis to construct women empowerment index, and we divided women empowerment into two domain dimensions. One is resource ownership, and the second is women's decision making. So then after we used household fixed effect model to know the relation. So these are summary statistics for just to in women's empowerment index. We have included, these are the indicators. So as I said, in resources we have included women's empowerment, women's ownership on investment, seeds, land holding, machinery, and cropman production. So we have included, these are the indicators based on that, as I said, factor analysis. So we have taken only those indicators who eigenvalue is greater than 2 and factor loading is greater than 0.4. Similarly, in case of decision making, we have taken decision on credit, cropman production, education of children, education on healthcare, fertilizers, household maintenance, number of children, and stepping out of home. So whatever indicator we have taken here, it have directly or indirectly impact towards household food security. So here it's graph showing that when there is shock happen, the calorie consumption of that household, it decline. So what are then question is what is the coping strategy household adopt? So we find that in our data set, these are some coping strategy household adopt when they face any weather shock, like drought, flood, we have included. So these are selling of land, selling domestic animal or bird, trees, mortgaging land and properties, saving, help from relatives, cash loan, kind loan, and government help and others. So here we find that there is gender difference in fast priority coping response to household shock, and when we did chi-square test also, we find that the same, where women consistently lean more towards strategy laying on resources or social network, whereas men more frequently prioritize asset and credit-based resources. So this is our estimation strategy. We have used fixed effect model. So this is our result. We find that shock has a negative impact towards household calorie consumption. So in column 1, what we did just to check the robustness of our result, in each model we have control some variables. In first column we have control, we have not control any, we just look at direct relation between shock and calorie consumption. And second, we have control the household and household characteristics. In third, we have control household characteristic with the sanitation activities. And in fourth, it's a balance. So we find in every model, we find that yes, if there is a shock, it's negatively impact household food security. And when looking into does women empowerment can helpful to resolve it, then we find that yes, shock effect, women empowerment can lead to household food security when there is no shock. But if a household face shock, that we didn't find any relation if that women empowerment can help to improve household food security during shock. So looking into the dimension-wise in resources, women's resource ownership, we find that women's ownership is important for improving household food security, but during shock, it has no role. Similarly, in case of decision making also, we find the same. Coming to, here we had tried to look into those households who have faced the shock. Among that household, does women empowerment and coping strategy vary? That means, what those coping strategy the household adopting. So which coping strategy has more or a positive or a negative impact towards household food security? So what we find that a household where women have less, we can call women resource ownership or decision making, any coping strategy that household is adopting has a negative impact. But those household women have more empowerment, ownership on saving or help from relative has a ownership on saving has a positive impact towards household food security, and also the help from a relative has a also positive impact. Similarly, in case of resources, we find that ownership on saving has a positive impact if women is women on resource ownership is more in that household. And agency, also we find the same result. So coming to the discussion and conclusion, the finding confirmed that weather shock significantly reduce household calorie consumption. And this result also consists with the evidence from the sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. On the other one hand, we find that women empowerment is important for household food security, but during shock, we didn't find any relation. Addressing food security is an era of climate volatility, therefore requires moving beyond household level intervention towards multi-scalar strategy. So that integrates gender sensitive empowerment with broader structural measures like climate resilient agriculture technology, diversified livelihood opportunity, and so on. So nevertheless, we have some limitations. The conceptualization of empowerment is restricted to two dimensions, that is resources and women ownership due to data limitation. And we are unable to explore the intermediate challenge, why this is happening. So for that, actually, this is my PhD work. So we conducted some primary data. So there only we are able to give the answer why this is happening. And the last, as maybe there is a measurement errors might arise from recall bias. That's from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Shakuntala. Shakuntala has tried to integrate the household calorie consumption with the women's women's access to resources, household resources, and power relations within the household. So we are now, I am inviting the discussant, Professor Govinda Chowdhury. He is the Professor of Economics from North Bengal University.
All of you. In this session, we had, as you know, 4 presentations on issues that affect women well-being. We talk of inclusion and making women equal partners in development, but the 4th presentation rightly shows what are the challenges in it, right? I will start with Alankrita's, presentation. It was nice. But there are some issues that I would like to highlight over here. One is, when you talk about feminization, you have rightly pointed out that there can be many dimensions of feminizations, okay? But it necessarily doesn't mean empowerment also. There's an interesting study by Clement and Luz. It was an IWMI study in Nepal, and they actually coined the term called telephonic husband. So what does it mean is, because a lot of men have migrated to other countries, women are forced to carry on the agriculture activities, but the decisions are made through telephones. So that's the reason they call it a telephonic husband arrangement. Which shows that what the limitations in this process. At the same time, I have a query. I think this is a work in progress. Your PhD work. It's a very elementary work in the sense you have collected 400 household data. Do you have some plan to do something else with the data, or just it is exploratory work? That is something you can explain us, what you have in your, agenda. The next is by Soham. Soham work is elaborate, and the use of data is something appreciable. I will say that. But there are a few issues that I will highlight. This is from my experience. When you talk about education effect, which you mentioned, right? Education effect is just not limited to women being enrolled in an educational institution, therefore they're not moving out from the workforce, but it has something else as an effect. We find, at least in a lot of surveys, when young people gain education, they feel something, I will say it is a stigma for them to go back and work in agriculture. They're willing to work in other sectors, maybe in the service sector, very low paid jobs, which they consider as a status symbol. But working back as a farmer, they don't want to be identified as a peasant anymore because of many social reasons. In the section 2 of your paper, you actually point out that you would be talking about policy intervention, but I think that is something which you can add. Maybe this is a work in progress which you can add and you can discuss on it. Okay. In case of Shakuntala's paper, it's an interesting paper because you have brought in the issue of climate-induced shocks and how empowerment of women can actually address it, but you also have accepted the thing that it is just not enough. It will not help. But there are 2 technical things I would like to know from you. One is you are talking about fixed effect. That is the method you applied. Is it something which you decided arbitrarily, or you have followed some test methods to decide whether you'll go for fixed methods or you'll go for random effect methods? That is something you should explain. And then I think the results are there, but you have not provided us with diagnostic analysis. That is something you should give us, because then it can check the robustness of your results. That is important for us to know. Okay. With this, I think we can initiate a discussion on the presentation made by the 4 speakers.
Now, the paper presenters can explain about the points raised by the discussant, and then we continue the Q&A session.
what I want to say is that you're asking about conceptualizing feminization of agriculture. So in my PhD work is basically the study of impact of feminization of agriculture on performance of agriculture and quality of life of the farming families. And for that, one of the objectives is conceptualizing feminization of agriculture. And while going through the literature, I went through it and understood that definitely it is not about the number increase, but it is also not about just the empowerment. We also need to include all these aspects. And one of these aspects was the unpaid labor. Like, it cannot be said that the unpaid labor is not feminization of agriculture if we talk in terms of qualitative feminization. Like, feminization is not only associated with agriculture, it is happening to a lot of sectors, and it can be associated with biology as well. So with that point in mind, for my own PhD thesis, I designed a questionnaire. And the first part of it was for conceptualization of feminization of agriculture. And in that, one small part was this time use, wherein we took 10 activities and listed them in terms of activities. While analyzing, I did this primary analysis, wherein I took, divided it in 3 particular domains of paid labor, paid work or domestic work, and the leisure or sleep resting activities. Sir, I do agree with you that like decision making is not just one, it's not just the aspect of feminization of agriculture, but when we talk about the debate of feminization of agriculture, we have to understand that we cannot simply talk about the numbers that women are engaging in agriculture, and we have to look at that dimension that there is decision making also happening for those females. And the second question you raised was the exploration about the data. So, like I had just finished collecting my data, and then the opportunity for this, I think it was in June end. So I had to submit. So I had an abstract, and I could only analyze because I collected data and I analyzed it on using a software called CS Pro. I used it for like feeding the data and the analysis part. So I was not able to complete the whole analysis till then, and like in June only I ended my survey. So I presented I gave just a small part of it as an abstract. So the temporal unfreedom and feminization of agriculture is just a very small part for my own PhD work, and the whole questionnaire is about conceptualization, then the performance of agriculture indicators, and then the quality of life indicators I've asked questions on. And those I'll be like giving my, analyzing it for my thesis work.
Thank you, Professor. I agree with you on the education effect bit, but largely where I mentioned education effect was that a decade back it was declining women's labor force participation, and then of course Professor Rangarajan and certain other quarters were saying it, women are withdrawing from labor force. Why? Because there's a continuing of education, and because of which the kind of work that is available in rural India, they're not engaging in it. And I absolutely agree that would have been the case. But now that sort of we are seeing that women's participation in employment is increasing, and yet your salaried is somewhat stagnant. So maybe there is a need to revisit that whether education effect, and thereby, waiting for better opportunities, or, denying the peasant-like identities that are formed by working within agriculture into detail, which I have not looked into here. In terms of policies, as I mentioned, that largely the female question to be looked at as a citizenship question, without taking their labor aspect. Therefore, you give cash transfers, therefore you provide, universal bus rides. These are policies which might create environment for work, but work would not appear immediately. I mean, you need productive capital which absorbs labor. So as long as that is missing, even we provide these band-aids which might break down the patriarchal norms, so on and so forth, but the natural demand for capital which can absorb female in non-farm or elsewhere as well is a requirement for the policymakers, is what I intended to say on that. Thanks, sir.
Thank you, sir. So, actually, we have test horseman test to choose between fixed effect and random effect. So, it's still I'm working on this paper, and I agree. I have not explained much about the data. So, that's.
We'll take a few questions.
Particularly about women from manual working class and poor peasant class. Are we somewhere trying to miss the whole conversation around the lack of employment? Something which I feel in this whole time poverty that gets missing, because are we trying to say that because they are so burdened by the domestic work and all the time burden part, they are not able to participate in the wage employment? Or is it other way, that there is no productive work or wage employment that's available that probably pushes them to spend more time on these things? How do we place that? Because if we are not doing that, somewhere we are also missing out on the whole employment crisis part, right? We are just trying to say that they are engaged more time here, so they are not working. So which somewhere I feel is missing out on that point. So that's all I have to ask. But excellent presentations.
Wrong, right? Somewhere you mentioned that you are using quasi-experimental research design. So in that quasi-experimental research design, which tool you are using? And second is that, what is the identification strategy of that tool to curtail endogeneity there? And my second question is that you are sampling to, you said women managed household and male managed household. So what is the factor that why someone is characterized as women managed household? Is it because she is widow or she had some occupied job? So what is the major factor that contributing a household to be women managed household? Thank you.
About the unpaid domestic work in your presentation, but what about the unpaid labor of women in the production process? That didn't come out, so how?
Ma'am, I would like to answer your question first, that feminization of agriculture, when I talk about it, the results here were not about feminization of agriculture. My topic, when I use feminization of agriculture, I have taken other indicators in terms of activities, number of activities, agricultural particularly activities, because it was rural households. And we were talking about feminization of agriculture. So we listed the number of activities that can happen. And for those activities, we also measured were the women involved regularly or casually, and were they not involved at all in those activities. And if at all, for 12 number of activities we had listed, and from that, I took only those activities where majorly women were participating. I simply removed them, because participation in traditional terms cannot be termed feminization. If some woman is if sewing and processing process, women are involved traditionally, those cannot be called a feminization. So for productive work, another dimension was used, for those productive activities, the number of activities in which women were participating to the total number of activities, that proportion was used. And other than that, we also took the wage differentials for other activities between men and women. And the aspect of decision making was also included, as in with a Likert scale, I measured the involvement of women in these households in terms of how much they were involved in agricultural decision making. And also for the household data, we had proportion of women participating in the total terms, and also in terms of last 3 years if new females have joined in that household. So all this was used to create a feminization index, which is another my own PhD work that I have not presented here. But since sir asked about the decision making aspect, telephonic husbands, I've gone through that, and because of it, I cannot say that feminization of agriculture is just one thing. It has a number of things, and that's why we've created a sort of all the dimensions which I could go through literature. I try to capture it on primary data, and I've tried to create an index out of it, and that will use it to see the impact it will have on performance of agriculture and quality of life. And ma'am, the quality of life and performance of agriculture I've still not analyzed. Like I've just finished my survey. So, but being on the fields, I realized that on performance of agriculture, I don't think I'm going to have a lot of quantitative difference in, like the impact will be so pronounced. But some aspects can be seen, like technological aspects or the marketing aspect, there is difference between feminized and non-feminized households. And
Yes.
I think that's it.
You want to talk?
I'll just take 30 seconds. Yes, I'm in absolute agreement, Niyati. The part of the problem is that, I mean, even if you provide more numbers of work, the social reproductive labor remains same. And it is not that because people are interested in doing social reproductive labor as they are not participating, but rather the other way around. The way they are participating is not remunerative. On the other hand, there is no change in your conditions of social reproductive labor. So these two combined, I think, indicates the distress. One is, of course, lack of work. The second is lack of improvement in the material conditions of social reproductive work. In agreement, absolutely.
Thanks, Section of Agriculture. And the first two papers, they at least tried to use the social reproduction, concept of social reproduction to an extent, but it has to be explored further. And the other two papers also is very significant in terms of the attempt. That one is that Sikkim, it's a very bold attempt to narrate about how far this land relations are anti-women, and still it is anti-women, and still it is deeply influenced by the patriarchal norms. And it is a new to many of us. Many of the things you present is new to us. And your paper is also attempting that capability approach, but I think the empowerment, how you define empowerment, the women's empowerment, it's a question. So the definition of women's empowerment is also always a contestable area. So we have to work on that. And I'm very happy that the economics is considered as a very hardcore subject which prevents the infiltration from gender studies. They are always trying to gatekeep for many of these concepts, but I'm very happy to see that the new approaches and your attempts are very, very good, and I congratulate you, and please continue with this and give more input to us. And I thank to FAS for this opportunity for chairing the session with new insights. Thank you all.